Well, welcome everybody to the paper session at our meeting conference, and on the program this is E8. And these papers are from the Honey Scholarship Awards, and we have, as your program pointed out, 4 presenters, and so we'll probably go in order. So the first one is Arthur, and we're going to give each of the presenters around 15 minutes total. And they've agreed to, maybe after 10 minutes to answer a couple of questions. So if you want to put your questions in the chat box in the right column, that's fine. And we'll just make sure the presenters see them. At any rate, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Arthur, our first presenter from the University of Ottawa.
Hello, everyone. I'm just going to sort out how to share my screen quickly. All right. Does everyone see my PowerPoint?
Yep.
Great. Okay. And I'm just going to make you guys smaller. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming to see my talk, and everyone else who's in the presentation today. My name is Arthur Braaten. I'm here from the University of Ottawa doing a Ph.D. in clinical psychology, and my supervisor is Dr. Veronika Huta. And I'm here to talk about why people react differently to the vastness of the universe. So why am I talking about the vastness of the universe? Why is it important? Well, it's the largest physical perspective that we currently can consider. And if you take a look at this image on the right-hand side, it's an image compiled by scientists from the Hubble telescope over many years. And this image contains approximately 200,000 galaxies. And this is only a small fraction of the at least 100 billion galaxies that exist in our universe. And each of these galaxies contain approximately 100 billion stars. And so when we consider how large and how vast the universe is, it can make it feel a bit existentially threatening, right? It can make us feel very small. It can bring existential concerns to mind about whether we matter, whether our worldview about the universe can still hold up to what we're experiencing, right? And so it can lead to polarizing experiences for people. And so when I talk about these experiences, on the one hand, people can feel these elevating experiences such as awe, wonder, elevation, connection to something larger than themselves, but they can also feel existential distress, so these feelings of meaninglessness, powerlessness, hopelessness, amongst many others. And there's also these experiences that are not predominantly considered positive or negative, but are seen to be as quite important to witnessing vastness, such as this feeling of a need for accommodation of what you're witnessing, but also this experience of the self as being very small. So I had 2 main research questions, which is, how do people react to cosmic vastness? Do they have these positive and negative reactions? And why do people react differently? What is it about a person that makes them have more positive or negative reactions? So I did a first study that was more qualitative in nature to understand people's reactions. And I had 103 undergraduate students come into the lab to watch one of 2 cosmic vastness videos. And I had them answer several different open-ended questions, such as, positive experiences, negative experiences, and spiritual and existential experiences. And I used content analysis to determine the frequency in which participants reported any given category. And so what we found was that almost all participants experienced some type of positive experience, but it didn't just contain the positive affects such as joy and relaxation, but also these elevating experiences of like wonder and awe. And also 2/3 of participants actually reported some type of negative experience, whether it be negative affects such as anxiety and sadness, but also this existential distress that we talked about of feeling insignificant and powerless and even lost at times. And again, at the bottom here, we have these non-valence reactions that I labeled, such as experiencing oneself as small and a need for accommodation. But there's these 2 other experiences that I discovered in the data, including existential contemplation and experience of the unknown. So this led nicely into my second study, where I had 622 undergraduates watch one of 3 videos online, which included the Cosmic Vastness video from study 1, a nature vastness video of vast natural landscapes on Earth, and a neutral control video. And in this case, I either found multi-item measures or created them for the current study based on the experiences I noticed in study 1, and wanted to compare them across the 3 videos, but I also wanted to understand, why do people react differently to cosmic vastness? So I did, I don't have time to go through all the measures, but I want to talk about the two main outcomes I've been talking about. So the 13-item Elevating Experiences Scale by Huta and Ryan included items such as feeling inspired, in awe, in wonder, feeling part of something greater than myself, deeply appreciating. And the Existential Distress Scale, which is something that we created for the current study, included items such as feeling insignificant, irrelevant, powerless, vulnerable, lost, and etc. And just to note that we did some exploratory factor analysis, and it did show that existential distress could be distinct from feelings of fear and sadness, at least in the current study. So when we did a comparison across the videos, what we found was that the Cosmic Vastness video elicited greater levels of elevating experiences compared to a neutral control video. However, when you look at the results, the Nature of Vastness video actually had the highest levels of positive experiences overall. This is probably the case because the Cosmic Vastness video also elicited greater levels of negative experiences compared to the two videos, including existential distress. And we try to figure out why is this the case. We see at the bottom here, these non-valence reactions are also at the highest level for the Cosmic Vastness video. So although it's not the main focus of my presentation today, I did want to outline that we found out that these four experiences are mechanisms or mediators between experiencing cosmic vastness compared to the neutral control condition and having both elevating experiences or existential distress, showing that these are some of the mechanisms to why people can have these positive and negative reactions. I also wanted to show a simple single-item bipolar question that we asked people whether they essentially experience more existential distress or more elevating experiences. And across both studies, surprisingly, people reported, or half of people reported experiencing more existential distress, and half of people reported more elevating experiences, providing further evidence that there is this kind of polarizing experiences that people can have. So why is this the case? What is it about an individual that causes these different reactions? Now, we had many hypotheses about different types of characteristics that might be important, which include things like self-esteem, so one's subjective sense of worth and competence in the world. Humility, which is a multifaceted concept, but I think for the purpose of the present study, it really came down to, for me, a comfort with feeling small and not needing to feel more important than others. Intellective processing style, so this preference for complex and abstract information. Big picture thinking, so tendency to engage with and consider the big picture. Meaning in life, and also spirituality, which wasn't a measure we initially included, or at least hypothesized, but we had a few items that tapped into that in the study. So we did moderation analysis to predict these different experiences. So we looked at the interaction between each of these moderators and the cosmic vastness condition, which was also defined as a cosmic vastness condition compared to a neutral control condition. What we found here was that only self-esteem had a significant interaction with the cosmic vastness condition to predict elevating experiences. We did the same type of analysis for existential distress, but we found that self-esteem, meaning in life, and spirituality all had a significant interaction. But what does this mean? How does this actually look for people's reactions? So we did some simple slope analysis, and what we found here was that the degree of self-esteem that you had didn't really matter too much when you had in the neutral control condition, especially for elevating experiences, but that higher levels of self-esteem facilitated greater levels of elevating experiences. And what I think this means for people is that if you have a high sense of worth and competence for yourself, you're more likely able to engage with challenging and expansive experiences such as awe or a sense of transcendence. At the same time, too, with existential distress, what we find is in the neutral control condition, there's less of a difference between people with high and low self-esteem, but as you can see, higher levels of self-esteem buffered the impact that cosmic vastness had on people's existential distress. And I think this really shows that having an internal kind of secure sense of worth allows yourself to kind of have a place within yourself to rely on if you have these existential threats coming from something like the cosmic vastness. We also looked at meaning in life and spirituality. What we found was that for meaning in life, again, neutral control condition, there wasn't much difference. But when you look at the cosmic vastness condition, a high level of personal meaning in life did have a buffering effect at the level of existential distress you experience when witnessing cosmic vastness. And I think this really shows that if you have a personal meaning in life that's strong, that challenges to maybe a more objective or a sense of meaning in life, maybe from a cosmic perspective, you may have a more resilient sense of being able to deal with those type of questions. And a similar pattern was found with spirituality. higher levels of spirituality buffered the effects of existential distress, or rather of cosmic vastness in eliciting existential distress. And I think this shows that if you have a framework, right, for understanding the big picture, you have a sense of making sense of everything, that when you're exposed to something like the vastness of the universe, you may not feel as threatened by it. So in the end, cosmic vastness elicits both positive and negative existential experiences, such as these elevating experiences, existential distress. And when you're witnessing such a thing, self-esteem can facilitate these more elevating experiences, while self-esteem, meaning in life, and spirituality can all buffer existential distress. This contributes to research on how people react to existential concerns and different forms of vastness. And I think it helps us understand some of the factors that are important in facing the inevitable challenges that are present in our world. Thank you very much. And if anyone has questions, I'd be happy to just talk about that.
Yes, thanks, Arthur. You can put your questions in the chat box, or I suppose you could actually unmute your mic if you're on Zoom. Yeah.
Where do I see the chat box? I'm trying to.
Oh, you have to hit chat at the bottom.
Okay, I have to maybe stop sharing, or anyways.
Oh, anyway, we'll let her. Oh, there we go. Well, I don't. Yeah, I don't see anything immediate here.
That's okay. We can.
So do I move on to our next speaker? And this is going to be Marianne. Ingheim?
Ingheim.
Ingheim,
Yeah.
okay, I've got it. From CIIS in California.
California, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so my name is Marianne Ingheim, and I'm a PhD candidate at California Institute of Integral Studies, where I'm writing a dissertation entitled A Self-Compassion Narrative, SCN, for Growth-Oriented Meaning in the Aftermath of an Adverse Event. And I'm also the author of a recent book, Out of Love, Finding Your Way Back to Self-Compassion. The title of this paper is Existential Positive Psychology and the Journey from Crisis to Meaning. Writing this in April of 2021, with the California sun spotlighting pink blossoms outside my window, and having just received my first COVID-19 vaccination, I sensed the beginning of the end of a long collective winter, a glimmer of hope after the shared trauma of the past year. Though I have to, side note here, say that that hope has been somewhat dashed by the Delta variant, but I wrote this in April. The global pandemic has ravaged humanity, leaving behind losses of loved ones, jobs, homes, and health. Even many of us who have been spared such losses are, as Adam Grant puts it, languishing. According to the American Psychological Association, physical and mental health impacts of the stress brought on by COVID-19 will remain with us for a long time. The burgeoning field of existential positive psychology, also known as PP 2.0, is well positioned to address these impacts because, as Paul Wong points out, it integrates the existential concern of suffering with positive psychology's focus on well-being. And it highlights the central importance of making meaning after experiencing adversity. Existential positive psychology is the second wave of positive psychology, and it addresses the critique of the latter's dismissal of the reality and benefits of negative emotions and experiences. This dismissal has been dubbed by Barbara Held the, quote, tyranny of the positive attitude, a toxic positivity that adds insult to injury by shaming those who do not sufficiently think positive about the difficulties they face. Not only is this attitude detrimental, it is not based in reality. As Iftan Lomas, Heffron, and Worth note, for the dialectical perspective of existential positive psychology, the, quote, positive and the negative always coexist, We cannot experience love, for example, without also experiencing grief. In fact, the negative often brings about the positive, as when negative emotions have positive effects, which Kashtan and Biswas-Diener discuss, or when negative experiences lead to growth, which Tedeschi, Taku, Calhoun, and others in the field of post-traumatic growth have discovered. From the perspective of Wong's existential positive psychology, growth and flourishing occur due to suffering, not despite it. Without winter, there would be no spring, or as the saying goes, no mud, no lotus. This does not mean we should seek out suffering as a program for personal growth, but rather that we use the suffering we inevitably experience in life as opportunities for growth. We neither deny our pain by embracing toxic positivity, nor do we over-identify with it by clinging to our victimhood. Instead, we inquire into what lessons we might learn from our suffering. For example, Irvin Yalom found that many people learn what it is they value most about life after having faced death. This newfound meaning in life increases their sense of well-being, though it does not necessarily eliminate painful emotions. As Tedeschi et al. Point out, it is common for post-traumatic growth to coexist with symptoms of post-traumatic stress. Practicing self-compassion, as proposed by Kristen Neff, can help ease the suffering. When we come from a place of self-compassion, we accept our pain exactly as it is and give ourselves the kindness we need while recognizing that pain is simply part of the human condition. From this place of mindfulness, self-kindness, and common humanity, we can inquire into what meaning or wisdom can be gleaned from our experience without judging ourselves or blaming others. As Michael Steger and others have noted, having and maintaining a sense of meaning in life is vital for subjective well-being. It is generally understood to include the components of coherence, purpose, and significance. We feel that our life makes sense, we have a reason to get up in the morning, and our lives matter. According to Viktor Frankl, considered the father of existential psychology, we have an innate will to meaning, a motivation which is confirmed by evolutionary theory. The human brain is designed to search for meaning. Moreover, for Frankl, potential meaning lies inherent and ready to be found in any situation, even as he did in a Nazi concentration camp. While we may not choose what happens to us, we have the freedom and responsibility to choose how we respond to it. In their research, Edwards and Van Tongeren have found that making meaning out of suffering is associated with greater well-being. It can cause better psychological adjustment to the adverse event, though this depends on the meaning made. For example, Crystal Park found that self-blame is negatively linked to adjustment in cancer survivorship. According to Silver and Uchtdegraaf's review of the literature, while finding meaning leads to good adjustment, searching for and not finding meaning causes more problems than not searching at all. From Frankl's point of view, however, we cannot not search for meaning. Meaning is something we simply do. It is an ongoing process, not just an outcome, a continuous journey of incorporating events into one's life story, while at the same time connecting the past with the future and something greater than oneself, of movement inward and outward, backward and forward, incorporating and transcending. Edwards and Van Tongeren also found that the experience of adversity is associated with lower meaning, which may partly explain the negative effects of suffering on mental health. according to Crystal Park, we may notice discrepancies between our global existential meaning, which serves as our overarching worldview, and our appraised situational meaning, the interpretation we have ascribed to a particular situation. And this discrepancy causes distress, and we may need to revise either our global or situational meaning to alleviate the distress. Meaning reconstruction can be vital, as Van Tongeren and Showalter Van Tongeren point out. Rigidly holding on to beliefs that no longer sustain us can leave us vulnerable to future suffering. For Robert Niemeyer, meaning reconstruction or restorying is critical to grief therapy. As we grieve our losses from COVID-19, we may need to let go of certain stories and embrace new ones. This can be painful, but it can also be an opportunity for growth and wisdom. On the journey from the crisis of COVID-19 to making meaning of the suffering it entailed, we have the chance to replace stories that no longer serve us. Wong's existential positive psychology, following Frankl, emphasizes the importance of choosing meaning that is oriented towards self-transcendence. In other words, finding meaning in something greater than oneself. It is about transforming my pain into something that is not just about me, but about humanity. In my view, as we make collective meaning of the pandemic, we are being asked to replace individualistic thinking with a sense of common humanity. We are being asked to transcend individual, local, and national interests in service to the well-being of the wider community, the collective, the global. For if there's one thing COVID-19 has shown us, it is the interconnectedness of all living systems. Personally and collectively, we can find meaning in the recognition of our common humanity, finding solace in the knowing that we are not alone in our suffering, and taking action for a more equitable and sustainable world. Existential positive psychology can play a key role in this transformation of meaning. Thanks for listening.
Well, thanks, Marianne. We'll just keeping an eye on the chat here, since we have a couple of minutes, if someone wants to ask a question. Okay. Well, we can always, if we go to the next speaker, we'll have a few minutes at the end where people can think about things. And I believe Adam is now here as well. And so why don't we, if it's okay with everyone, we'll get our next speaker up. This is Adam Mars from Lancaster University.
Can everyone see the screen? Sorry.
Yep.
Okay. So for the purposes, this isn't the title of my broader PhD study, but for the purposes of today's presentation, the title is Adding Meaning to Medicine, ? A preliminary exploration into how men seek well-being through social prescribing. I should say I'm Adam Mars. I'm a second-year PhD student at Lancaster University in the northwest of the UK. And it is a preliminary exploration at this point. So social prescribing, what is it? Basically, in the UK, and it's taken on a global agenda at this point. There's been a move to connect the NHS or health services to community care or community infrastructure and community groups. And social prescribing is a part of this. It's known as the personalised care agenda in the UK. So a linked worker working generally in a GP's practice will receive a client that they think can be helped by connecting to a community group and engage in a coaching conversation with them to find if some form of engagement can be made. So you can see there a picture of Scribbles of the Soul poetry for creative writing group. That's where the vignette will be derived from for today's talk. And this is a poem, I'm not going to read it out, that was produced by one of the men, and he's sort of lamenting the loss of a fixed role, but also touching on the hope perhaps that he's received through his engagement in social prescribing and the meaning contained in that, in his engagement. So the work really sits within of course, the Positive Psychology 2.0, which offers a more nuanced and less one-sided positive psychology, but also with the qualitative methodological claims in positive psychology that argue that we should be putting the person back in, holistic appreciation of the whole person. And of course, these humanistic concerns, traditional concerns of the humanistic canon, if you like, also map onto the policy concerns as well, that we need to get beyond biomedical reductionism and see the whole person again in healthcare. It was a snowball sample, 16 men, semi-structured interviews with 2 phases across the pandemic, really. So as I've just said, the social prescribing's main agenda is to add meaning to medicine. That's one of its central rhetorical claims. And within that is a criticism of the post-war welfare state, that it lacked these democratic mechanisms. It gave too much power to experts at the expense of everyday users, citizens, I would prefer to say. And of course, as I've said about the mapping onto traditional concerns of the humanistic tradition, Carl Rogers is someone whose claims for person-centered therapy proliferate amongst the output of the social prescribing community. But as we know, prior to COVID, the governmental philosophy of neoliberalism has really broadened and exacerbated inequalities, widening levels of income inequalities. In the UK, we've had austerity, which has hit the most poorly resourced communities the hardest in a regressive way. And Scott Barry Kaufman, whose work I'm a tremendous fan of, and who's reworked Maslow's hierarchy of needs for a sailboat metaphor, which I think's beautiful actually, claims that our social protection system might be heightened. We feel a little bit more under threat continuously by these widening patterns of inequality, if they're not meeting, if we're not having our needs met by the broader infrastructure. Other authors have described this as social evaluative threat, and they've drawn upon Alfred Adler's earlier concept of an inferiority complex, which was later put to more adequate use, I think, by Karen Horney, in terms of masculine psychology. But when we feel inferior, we often overreach in the opposite direction. And I think that's been an important part of my analytical positioning with my data collection, especially with men. So if the environment is sort of accommodating, as the psychoanalytic tradition tells us, often our meaning is split off and hidden, protected. Winnicott's false self is perhaps perhaps my favorite theorization of this, but of course R.D. Laing talks about the divided self. Object relation theories like Fairbairn make similar points. And this, of course, measures of interpersonal trust within working class communities are less than middle class communities, and this has a social gradient as well, containing lower levels of social capital. So social prescribing, in order for it to create meaning across the board, is rubbing up against some of these structural patterns that need to be accounted for. And in doing that, I'd say our needs being denied, meaning deferred, if it's not a hierarchy. Nevertheless, if neoliberalism is creating these competitive cultures, are we swimming upstream when we find meaning in this instance? Scott Barry Kaufman offers a vignette of Sam, whose needs to belong are that heightened that he even partakes in clubs that he doesn't particularly find intrinsically rewarding. They don't connect to any self congruence or sort of authenticity. But because he yearns belonging, he goes along with the activity in the groups anyway. He's yearning for belonging. So some authors claim that it's rhetorical efforts, social prescribing, to connect people to meaning is rather superficial. Foucault, Machiavellian strategies are used to claim that this is a bad faith attempt to connect people to meaning, when what they need really is greater structural reform. And this maps onto familiar criticisms of the one-sidedness of first wave positive psychology, which I think are necessary, and this idea of toxic positivity as well. So within my sample, the men all tend to be, they're all located in the north of the UK, which is one of the most spatially uneven regions within Europe, and there's a statistic that men in the lowest social economic class of England are almost 3 times more likely to have chronic conditions than men in the highest. Nevertheless, this focus on the structural determinants of well-being, as it's been described, does present a rather bleak psychology, and it's rather reductive at times, in denying people connecting to meaning at the bottom ends of the income distribution. So the most solid connection that I've made with Positive Psychology 2.0 is many of the men who attended social prescribing felt tremendous anger, and efforts to move them from this affective state to anger management, for example, classes as one of the samples, was it doesn't take a great deal of imagination to see this as an act of misrecognition or repression, actually. And so the expression of negative emotion is something that I've really been interested in throughout the early stages of the analysis. So I'm going to move on to a vignette. James was socialized into masculine norms early in the North, attended a boxing club where he was taught discipline, wisdom, and self-respect. Reflecting on his later journey into poetry, he said he'd been classed as gay if he'd have gone with this in high school, which I think is an interesting reflection. In his 40s, he was diagnosed with a chronic condition requiring chemotherapy and had to retire prematurely from a job on the local industrial estate in Merseyside. And he claimed that other people started to notice a change in him. He was bottling his anger up, his loss of role, loss of being the provider, loss of cleaving to these norms associated with traditional masculinity. He described a major flashpoint as the fall, where on visiting his father in hospital, who was in his 80s at the time, he fell on his way back to the toilet and James was too weak, he couldn't pick him up. And after this, he felt like he was robbing oxygen, and presented some strong suicidal ideation, actually. He claimed that men don't talk. He was initially advised to go and see a counsellor, but his early socialisation had told him that that wasn't good and he didn't want people to think that he was nuts. He's always been a great believer in helping yourself, this sort of stoic, broad masculinity view. And later he was referred on to social prescribing, and he said he found it really therapeutic. It was the poetry creative writing group. As long as he wasn't forced to write, there's no judgment on him, and he shocked himself with his latent creative potential. It helped him to process his emotions and capture his feelings on paper. During the pandemic, he was sustained by having some of his poetry publicised. He broadened into drama, and he was shocked by what came out of him. Within his poetry, you have this continuation of a rather Jungian theme, the archetype of the warrior. I've perhaps offered an initial interpretation that this is a reworking of some of the aggression and anger that he was feeling from losing his job and being struck down with early retirement, and the need to defeat foes both internally and externally. And I think a really nice conclusion was on our latest interview, he said that he'd been put onto some reading on Einstein's views on faith and Spinoza, and he claimed that it's all about acceptance. He's not neurotically fighting to cleave towards these one-sided views of masculinity anymore throughout his journey, but he's integrated some of the previously unacceptable emotions and found renewed meaning in his poetry and his engagement. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Adam. So again, I'll just give it a few seconds here to see if anyone has a question.
I have a quick question, if that's okay.
Huh?
Sorry, just moving on. Adam, you mentioned the poetry piece of it, and it sounds like that was within the context of a group. Is that what you're mentioning? And I was just curious what you think. I just imagine poetry amongst a group of either men or even diverse, and how vulnerable that needs to be to share those feelings. And I just was wondering about your thoughts about how much of maybe his change, not only in expressing himself, but also in the context of a group, and maybe how that may have impacted his kind of shifting.
Yeah, so certainly I think I've rather distorted the group dynamics or under theorized them for the sake of this presentation by offering the single vignette, but most certainly the sort of Rogerian climate of non-judgment, which I think goes against the grain of much of modern organizational culture, for example, which is rewards-based, performance outcome-driven. That certainly comes through, and I think those early tentative attempts at expressing the poetry, once they was received by the facilitator with praise and non-judgment, the self potentialities of a latent self, if you like, were emboldened and firmed up by this interpersonal dynamic. Nonetheless, it's not all positive, and I think that perhaps is under analysed in this paper. There is elements of a wounded healer dynamic at times with the link worker. If you behave a certain way, they take great credit for the journey that James has been on, for example, and there is sometimes this sort of remothering sort of figure there that I don't think is potentially helpful within that dynamic. But nevertheless, the group dynamic is certainly central. I hope that's answered your question, Arthur.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks.
Good. Yeah, well, thanks, Arthur, for the question. And I guess we'll move on to our final speakers in the program. This is Jonah Lee and Joel Wong, both of Indiana University.
Hi everyone, welcome to my presentation. This is Jonah. This presentation is titled Laypeople versus the Tripartite Perspectives, a latent profile analysis of laypeople's beliefs about meaning in life. We know that meaning in life has been an important subject and construct in psychology because people often seek to live more meaningful lives. People would love to find more meaningfulness in their lives. Recent scholarship has conceptualized meaning in life as consisting of 3 dimensions, including comprehension, purpose, and mattering in the world. For example, George and Park proposed the 3 tripartite dimensions and used the multidimensional existential meaning in life scale to measure the 3 dimensions. Specifically, they defined comprehension as the degree to which individuals perceive a sense of coherence and understanding about their lives. Purpose is defined as the extent to which individuals experience life as being directed and motivated by valued life goals. And mattering is defined as the degree to which people feel that their existence is of significance, importance, and value in the world. While these dimensions of meaning in life have provided a lot of insights of the nuances of meaning in life, one question remains unsolved is that whether lay people would think similarly with this dimension or differently. Also, there are very few studies on meaning in life using a person-oriented framework, trying to understand people's experience from a holistic perspective. And so to address these gaps, this study aims to identify profiles of lay beliefs about meaning in life using latent profile analysis. Specifically, we examined 2 research questions. The first research question was about the prevalence of the lay beliefs about meaning in life. So we generated 5 open-ended questions, as you can see in Table 1, and those types of beliefs were informed by findings from socio-cognitive psychology, and we tried to code participants' responses to these open-ended questions. Our second research question would be using latent profile analysis to examine whether the identified lay beliefs could be classified into meaningful clusters. So we recruit 417 US adults from Amazon Mechanical Turk, and we used directed content analysis to code participants' open-ended responses. We also created a coding manual, and the inter-rater reliability was high. The kappa value was 0.98, and we identified participants' meaningful content of lay beliefs, as you can see in Table 2. We use Latent Go version 4.5 to conduct latent profile analysis. So for our first research question, as shown in Table 2, we identified the top 5 to 6 prevalent lay beliefs about meaning in life using frequency count. including associating meaning in life with interpersonal relationships, purpose in life, self-transcendence, personal growth, spirituality, meaning-making as well. Notably, comprehension and mattering were not prevalent when people try to describe their conceptualizations and meaning experience on meaning in life. Regarding our second research question, we use latent profile analysis to try to analyze and capture meaningful clusters based on the identified lay beliefs. So as shown in table 3 and 4, we found that the 3-class solution provide the optimal representation of the data. It is significantly better than any other models. To provide names of the identified clusters, we compare different scores of different clusters. So we identified the first cluster as self-transcendent perspective takers because people in this cluster tend to score higher in conceptualizing meaning in life as self-transcendence. We also named the second cluster as spirituality growth seekers because people in this category tend to score higher in spirituality and growth, personal growth. The third cluster was named as relationship pursuers because people in this category tend to associate meaning in life with interpersonal relationships. So this study, to recap, we identified top 5 to 6 lay beliefs about meaning in life and found that our participants mostly did not attend to comprehension and mattering, like 2.4% from comprehension and 0.2% for mattering. It suggests a divergence between lay and scientific theories about meaning in life. So we call for future studies to further investigate the nuances of meaning in life, specifically the definitive elements, because ideally a comprehensive definition of meaning in life should fully capture both scientific and lay people's perspectives. We also meaningfully classify participants into 3 clusters, including self-transcendent perspective takers, spirituality growth seekers, and relationship pursuers. So this study has different strengths. From a methodological and empirical standpoint, we use latent profile analysis to group lay people's beliefs instead of just focusing on variables, which would be the variable-centric perspective. So our study provides support for the collectivistic and meaning orientations in PP 2.0, positive motivations for others' well-being, and the intricate link of meaning in life and beyond the self acts, respectively. Importantly, our findings validate Wong's self-transcendence hypothesis that meaning comes from commitments that transcend personal interests, such as servant leadership. Indeed, our finding highlights that people tend to experience meaning in life in interpersonally oriented terms instead of self-focused terms, such as mattering, defined as my existence is of significance, importance, and value in the world. So overall, we highlight more research on meaning in life in terms of its conceptualization. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have questions, please reach out to me. You can email me your questions through the email address listed here. Thank you. Goodbye.
Well, we've got, I think it's, we've got some people. So I didn't know if, obviously, Jonah and Joel aren't here. But if you had I don't know, Marianne, did you have a question for Adam?
I've got a question for that last paper, actually.
Yeah.
If that's okay.
Yeah, I don't think Jonah is here. I'm just looking at all the people who are, but I don't know.
Yeah, I was just intrigued by the divergences between academic understandings. They mentioned that lay people stay away from the I can't remember the two sections, that comprehension and but nevertheless there's a divergence between, for example, Steger's meaning in life questionnaire and lay people's understanding of meaning in life, and I was just wondering if they'd drawn any conclusions as to why that was the case.
I just wonder if, I was just going to mention, I wonder if some of those categories from lay beliefs, some theorists might argue kind of fall under like higher order categories. I don't know if that's the case. I imagine, for example, some people's purpose in life might be to have good relationships, right? So like, you know, where would that fall under? So that was just my first thought to your question, but I didn't do the paper. So. But yeah, that was just my thought.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Well, I guess I can always take the recording and send the speaker your question. Maybe he'll get back to you guys with an answer.
Well, I'm wondering, well, it's 11:25. Did any of our speakers just want to add one last comment before we end the session?
Yeah, same for me. Nice, great, really enjoyed it. Learned a great deal, and thank you.
Okay, well, thank you everybody. I guess we'll see everyone for Paul's keynote coming up.
Yes.
Great. On their break. Bye.
Bye.
When you hold it on to hold, sing me a sad song over and over. I'll be alright by and by. Let me be consumed in a love divine to find where the treasure lies. I want to hear that small voice whisper to my forgotten soul. They say it's never too late to start again. What breaks your